This is the I Read Comic Books podcast. I am your host, Mike Rapin. Joining me this week, a pair of superheroes who have no choice but to set aside their differences to save the universe, and also their friendship, Kara Szymborski.
I feel like that's a direct comment on our feelings about Grant Morrison, but thank you.
And Paul Jasley.
Yeah, Kara, I'm glad we can put those differences aside to talk about dumb comics today.
Before we start the show today, I do want to say rest in peace to Mr. Kevin Conroy, the voice of Batman, the forever voice of Batman. Terrible loss in the community. Kara, Paul, I know both of you have very strong Batman feelings. Anything you want to say, I guess, before we get into things?
I'm in deep mourning and cannot be reached for comment at this time. No, it's just like when something is so much a part of your entire youth and well into adulthood, and every time you think this is a bad interpretation of Batman, knowing that you can go back to the good interpretation of Batman at any time, and then to find out that the person behind that interpretation is no longer on Earth, it's just I'm going to stop right here or else I'm going to cry. But yeah, that was like Kevin Conroy's performance as Batman for 30 years was completely spectacular, and I think that now that he's gone, most of us will realize like how just incredible his performance really was, and hopefully he'll get some accolades outside of the nerd community and among non-nerds to be like, that was a really great performance. He did really spectacular work, and it was not just a children's show, it was for all of us.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, that's I don't really know what to say that other people haven't already said better or more eloquently, but you know, for me, that show is a huge part of my making me love Batman. I mean, that was when I was like 8 or 9, 10 years old, that show came out, and to this day, that is the voice I hear in my head when I read Batman comics, and I think that's the biggest tribute. He defined that character for multiple generations, and yeah, it's
absolutely
sad that he's gone, but he has a tremendous legacy that he left behind.
Yeah. We do have, like Kara said, 30 years of Batman that we can always go back to, which is a great thing still. So yeah, I figured we had to bring it up. Somebody mentioned in the notes, and I, figured, yes, time to talk about it. But I do have one other quick thing before we get into the show. We have a hangout coming up on November 19th at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard. If you want to be there, you should come and hang out and talk about comics. It's going to be a great time. It's always a great time, like 3, 4, 5 hours worth of great time. It's insane. Get there before Nick starts to talk about F1, and I promise we will talk about comics for multiple hours. Everyone who's been to a hangout knows that at some point he's going to take the conversation, and it's going to be F1. We love you, Nick. Just kidding. Not really, but we love you nonetheless. Anyways, let's get into things. Let's talk about comic books, because I have 2 legally mandated questions that I have to ask. That is, how have you been? How have comic books been? Let's start with you, Paul.
I've been doing well, Mike. I have to admit, I am woefully behind on my monthly comics. I was a few weeks there where I couldn't go to the shop, so when I did go, I had a giant stack of comics. I'm slowly making my way through a couple weeks worth of single issues. Luckily, though, this is the silver lining. The weather here in West Michigan is getting more seasonable, which means mid-30s and snowing soon, so that gives me more time to stay inside and read comics. So I'll catch up eventually.
It's a wonderful spin, Paul.
Yes, I like that.
It's gonna be miserable, but that means more comic books.
Exactly. I try to look on the bright side of life, to quote Monty Python. But there are a couple books I read over the past few weeks I wanted to make time to talk about here on the show. One of which is Ducks, 2 Years in the Oil Sands. It's by Kate Beaton. I talked about this a couple of weeks ago. I think last time I was on the show was the top of my pile pick. And if I'd got a chance to sit down and read it, it is a big book. This is over 400 pages. And as I talked about when I brought it up on that episode, it is a memoir that Kate Beaton wrote about the time that she spent working in the Alberta oil sands in Canada. And unlike her other work, I'm sure most people know Kate Beaton due to her books, Hark a Vagrant, King Baby is another one she did. Those books are very humorous. She has sort of a loose cartooning style, a lot of literary and historical references. This book is very personal, very different. It's a memoir. And what's interesting is the way her artwork, which is so seemingly simplistic, translate to a more personal story. Like the way she's able to present the information and her experiences in this book in a way that never feels exaggerated. Like it's very true to life in a way that I think you can only do in this type of artwork and this type of comic. She talks about going to work in these oil sands because it's a good way to make a lot of money despite the economic and ecological devastation that oil mining process leads to. But she doesn't make any judgments about that. The book is more about her experiences day to day working there. She's one of the very few women working at these places, surrounded by men, isolated from the rest of society, basically, a long way from her home on the eastern coast of Canada. So that becomes part of the book. It's again, doesn't try to make any grand statements, right or wrong about this stuff, but just present her own experiences. I will say there are a couple instances where she discusses sexual assault. So there's a content warning. As much as I want to recommend this book, I do have to put that content warning out there. There's nothing explicit or graphic, but she does directly address the consequences of those things that happen to her in a very honest and open way. And I think that's what I like about the book so much. It does feel like a deeply personal book in a way that's not judgmental, but it's hard not to read her own thoughts about this stuff in the book. So it's one of the best comics I've read this year. It's a tremendous work. I think it's very important work. And again, like I said, I highly recommend it with that giant caveat. Some content might be uncomfortable for some readers, but that said, I thought it was a tremendous book. So
yeah, every single person, like from all waves of life, I think that has picked this book up as says it's one of the best books they've read this year. I'm so hyped to get my copy. For some reason, I forgot to pre-order this at my comic shop like a dingus. So I had to pre-order it when I went on Saturday and picked up my huge stack of trades that I forgot that I had to pre-order. You know, it's that problem of like, you don't go for like 3 weeks and then you forget, oh crap, I hit, pre-order on like 6 things and then they all come in at once. But yeah, no, that sounds amazing. I'm very excited to check this out. Yeah.
And I don't mean to make it sound like all grim. There are some genuine moments of levity and humor that she finds in the absurdity of the situation. So it's not, it's not completely depressing, but it is very depressing overall. But it's definitely a book to take your time with and read slowly, not in just one sitting, I guess, what I'm trying to say.
Gotcha. Kara, what about you? How have you been? How are comics? All that stuff.
I have been watching the disintegration of Twitter from the inside out. I've been spending like way more time on Twitter than I normally would because I'm like, what is the garbage fire today? And it's like totally fascinating, very horrifying, but also it kind of feels like, I don't know, I feel like I use Twitter predominantly to keep up with the comic book industry and comic book news. And I've been seeing a lot of people talking about migrating to different places or like downloading all their content and just deleting their accounts. And it makes me kind of sad because I feel like for all its flaws, Twitter is a great way to find, like, easily disseminate news through more niche communities like that in a way that was still like searchable and accessible. And I don't know what another like easy enough equivalent of that would be. And I know a lot of people say like, oh, Tumblr. And I'm like, yes, but if we all go on Tumblr, then everything just becomes a nightmare of reblogs and you will just scroll forever. It's not as succinct. So that's making me a little bit sad about that. I'm going to total 180 from Paul's pick and share with you this manga that I read. Makeup is Not Just Magic by Akumi Rota. And you know what, guys? I really like how-to manga. I feel like this is definitely more of a thing in manga as opposed to American style comics where our artist and author will get money to create a book that explains how to do something. Like, I very happily read the Marie Kondo manga a few years ago that was like, here's the Marie Kondo method in manga format. Let's take this girl on a journey through cleaning up her life and getting a boyfriend by cleaning her house. And this one also in that genre of like, here's how to do these things, we will tell it to you through manga format. And this particular manga is presented as a beginner manual to makeup and skincare, which, like, I was thinking of you earlier, telling our listeners about the hangout coming up and joking about Nick going off about F1. I was like, tell them that I'll yell at them about skincare. I will make everyone put on sunscreen if it kills me. So, anyway,
I forgot that was a big topic. Yeah.
Anyway, so this manga was interesting because, like, in how-to mangas that I have read, I'm used to more of a structure where they try to like force a plot But this one, instead of having an overarching plot in this manga, it was definitely presented as more like serialized chapters. Like each chapter was set up where there was a different internet commenter asking a question about makeup or skincare, and the author's persona in the book would answer this question. So not really a typical narrative plot structure, but more of like a call and response situation. The thing that there were like a few little touches that just made me so delighted that this was a manga. One of them was the internet commenters. Like instead of just showing what their question was in text, they were personified as like a tiny little chibi version of themselves that like squished their way out of the smartphone screen of the author to like show up and be like, "Sensei, guide me.
That's so adorable.
How do I know what skin type I have?" It was just really charming. And it's interesting to read because I've read way more than my fair share of makeup and skincare how-tos over the years. And so I came into this with a lot of opinions already. So in my humble opinion, this manga is not a good starting point for a beginner because almost immediately the author's like, so you want to get started with fixing your face? Well, you're going to need 50 products. And I was like, whoa. But it was also interesting to see like one thing that I did really enjoy was in American and Western media talking about how to apply makeup. There's not usually a discussion of how eye makeup applied differently for different eye shapes makes a difference. But since this manga is Japanese, they go into like how to like use eye makeup if you have a monolid, if you have hooded eyes. Like they went into the different, like, why would you use different shades of shadow in different places on your eye if your eye had a different shape? And I thought that was very interesting because it's not something I've seen discussed a lot again in America.
Sure.
And yeah, it was just like I cannot like fully recommend this for somebody who's interested in learning more about makeup and skincare because it is like very clearly sort of tied up in this author like being slightly autobiographical. Like she used to work at a makeup counter and is now a mangaka. She's talking about how she felt like some dude, like she had like part of her origin story of how she got into makeup, and it was because some like random dude bumped into her like while walking down the street one day and called her frumpy, and it like triggered this. I was like I was really not expecting it to get that hard that quick and then be like totally dismissed and never talked about again. But she was basically like, society thinks that I'm frumpy and I wanted to change that, and now makeup is like a self-expression for me, but it's also like you do need a standard baseline of looking a certain way for people to like treat you okay. And I was like, brutal, slightly true, but I hate it and I do it myself. But like, no, I don't. Like, don't talk to me. I just don't look at my collection of eyeshadow. I feel very like there's too many things happening in my brain right now. But it was like, but like part of that perspective, I think for her shown through, and like she was saying, oh, if you do nothing else, make sure you have like a good foundation on your face to like hide all your flaws. Like that was her number one, was start with a beautiful visage. And I'm looking at my makeup collection. I was like, yo, I like never put foundation on. Like maybe if I'm going to an event and I know I'm going to be photographed. But aside from that, I'm just like color on my eyes, color on my lips, the end. Because that's the fun part. And she was like, no, you need to look perfect first. And I was like, ma'am, can I introduce you to glitter?
Distract from your flaws with sparkly objects on your face.
Exactly. No, okay, but it was interesting to kind of like be in conversation with myself about my own approach to makeup and skincare while looking at this guide that was like self-professed to be for beginners, and like presented in a way, like the thing that really like bothered me about it, even though I totally would have been the target demographic for this, is the little barcode label on the back of the book where it kind of tells you like, you know, they show like what genre the book is or something. And this was categorized as teen. And I was like, don't don't give, I mean, yes, like as a teenager, I 100% would have devoured this and loved it, but like, no, no.
Yeah.
So that was my complicated and unexpectedly emotional journey through a manga that I can't totally recommend on any level.
Listen, comics will do things to you.
Wow.
You never expect it, you know? It's sometimes you read a book and it just takes you by storm. I totally get that.
I will say one final thought on this, because another part that I was genuinely delighted at. I have a very, very long and very, very complicated relationship with the skin on my face because it has been acne prone for the majority of my life at this point. And
Sure.
it's something I am like constantly like hyper fixated on. And there was a chapter about like what to do about your large pores or your clogged pores if you have like blackheads or whiteheads or acne. And so they actually like explained what makes a zit and how to the commenter was like asking, oh, how do I get rid of them, like what's the best way to like squeeze them out of my face? And like the correct answer is you're not supposed to touch them, and you're supposed to like gradually exfoliate and just like not use any products that clog your skin. But nobody wants to hear that. They want to watch friggin' Dr. Pimple Popper on
No, they don't.
So,
not me.
all right,
Absolutely
no.
not.
But,
No.
But like you're genuinely not supposed to do anything of that. So to illustrate that you're not supposed to like extract the gunk in your pores, were these little like adorable manga illustrations of like your clogged pores personified. So the little there's like a little glob with a cute face just like chilling in your pore representing a blackhead. I'm like, oh, he's so cute. So they were just showing what it looks like when you're trying to like yank out the cute little blackhead. And it looked adorable because it's a shoujo manga style, so it's just this little like bubble with a smiley face just being like throat. And it's like, well, if you tear out a blackhead you might damage the like cell walls of your pores, don't do it. And I'm like, well, now that I've seen the illustration of the cheerful little blackhead being ripped out of its home, like I'll surely view this differently.
That'll teach you not to damage your pores.
Well, on that note, Mike, how about you? What'd you read?
I'm going to move on to a completely different subject. We're back to superhero comics. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you all feel informed and go read that manga, because it does sound very interesting if you're interested in wearing makeup. But I'm not. Instead, I'm going to talk about the Fantastic Four 2022 #1. I read by Ryan North and Iban Coelho. The basis of this that I was pitched for it was Fantastic Four is fun. And, you know, I don't really know much about the Fantastic Four beyond your average comic fan's knowledge, right? There's Stretch Man, there's Fireboy, there's Invisible Lady, there's Rock Dude. They're a family. People made it very dramatic in recent years, and it never seemed like something that I would be into, despite my love of the idea of Marvel's first family. Like, I have this weird romantic idea of what they are. And there's a lot of potential, like, Kirby-esque insanity, right? There are stories about them going to the macroverse or the microverse and, you know, traveling around and seeing all these big things that we're going to see in the new Ant-Man movie, supposedly. Like, the Mark Miller stuff always intrigued me, but I never tried it. And I think I read like the first issue of the Hickman run, and I just never was able to get into Fantastic Four. Anytime the Fantastic Four were involved in things, I thought it was cool, but I could never read a Fantastic Four comic and really enjoy it. But the folks on the 70mm Discord, the folks on the IRCB Discord, some folks said it was good. And, you know, I'll always try a recommendation, even a recommendation that I know is bad, even a recommendation that I know is a joke. I'm here to give things a try, because how do you grow as a comic fan if you're not trying new things out of your comfort zone? That's like been my mantra for the past 8 years we've been doing this show. And, you know, not everything's going to work for you. I completely understand that. Like, I think that's a really good thing, because if everything works for you, like, do you have taste? Ponder that, dear listener. I ask you that question. Sorry, I'm attacking Danny directly right now in the chat. But sorry, Danny. All I'm saying is that, like, you read more, you start to understand what you like, you start to understand what you dislike, and as you engage more in these pieces of literature, you feel what works for you and what doesn't. So I tried this book, and you know what? It's pretty good. Despite what Ryan North says about his this being like a new reader friendly book. It kind of isn't, because it feels like there's this implied thing that you should know. But I went into this book completely blind, and I still had a pretty good time, right? Like, I didn't really know who Alicia Masters was, which is the Thing's wife, girlfriend, but they make that very clear about who they are, and how like the Thing and Alicia work, because the story is about the Thing and his wife traveling, and they end up at a hotel, and shenanigans incur, because that's what happens when the Fantastic Four get involved in anything. But the issue ends on a nice hook. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out, but I don't think that I'm going to be along for this ride, despite Ryan North's beautiful mantra, a beautiful series of points that he has at the back of this issue about what his 4 pillars are of writing this book. Like the Fantastic Four are fun, the Fantastic Four are adventurers, the Fantastic Four can do anything, and the Fantastic Four are accessible. Like, I love the idea of pushing that onto this book, because I think, again, multiple writers over the past decade have taken the Fantastic Four and made them extremely dramatic. And really, the Fantastic Four are supposed to be a fun group. They're supposed to be the optimistic 50s era, like retro futurism thing that we see, where everything is bright and shiny and the future's the Jetsons and everything is positive and optimistic and the future's great. And you really aren't supposed to dig into the implications of things and instead lean on what is positive and that everyone's prospering, right? I think the Fantastic Four is supposed to embrace that to a certain extent. And I think that's what this series is maybe going to do, but I don't know if I got that out of the first issue completely. I felt like the first issue was wholesome. I felt like we get to understand that these people care about other people. But if I want to read a book about a superhero who cares about people, I would go read Spider-Man. Fantastic Four doesn't feel like that book. To me, the Fantastic Four should be out journeying and discovering and fighting off, I don't know, like cosmic entities or whatever, and working together as a family. Instead, this issue was very, very grounded, and to me, that just didn't click. So I don't know. I'm excited to see where the book goes, but I don't think I'm going to be along for the ride. But again, if you're looking for something wholesome and interesting and a new take on the Fantastic Four, I think that this works. This will probably work for you. So
cool.
I don't know. It's cool. Plus, the cover art's beautiful. Like, say what you will about Alex Ross, the dude knows how to draw a damn good superhero comic book cover.
I've not picked this up yet. I'm very curious. Fantastic Four is something that I really love in theory, but very rarely actually sit down and read. Like, I read all of Hickman's run. I didn't really understand 2/3 of it, but I was there for it,
Sure.
But obviously there's so much, like you said, so much Kirby baked into the concept that even kind of tease that stuff out. That's really appealing to me. So I'm curious to check this out. It might be my version of Fantastic Four, contemporary version. So
I think the Fantastic Four are like the Archie gang of the Marvel universe. Like, you could theoretically put the 4 of them into like any situation and it would like sort of work, because they all, as long as they're like sticking to their character type, is kind of how I see it. Or like Scooby-Doo, like they kind of like fit into those, like you said, like more cheerful, optimistic. Like, if you just accept that they have like a new story, then it's fine. Like, I almost feel like they should not be laden with continuity. Like, they should be making a Fantastic Four book where every single issue is like totally different. Continuity doesn't matter. It's just, here's an adventure with the Fantastic Four. Like, that would make more sense than trying to like tie them into the Marvel universe almost.
100% agree with that. I think, like, Lost in Space also feels like this, like old, Star Trek kind of feels like they hit that same niche, right, of pulpy sci-fi that can just exist and you understand who they are, like their basic tropes, and then we can run with that for the story. Who knows if Ryan North is going to do that. The end of the issue has a big plot hook, feels a little bit heavier than I think the idea that he was pitching, but who knows? It may play out in a very interesting way. Anyways, Paul, what else have you been reading? Anything else you want to touch on before we move past all these comic books?
I'm never going to move past these comic books, Mike. That's why we're here.
Okay.
We talk about comics. You talk about breaking out of your comfort zone. So I read 2 Batman comics I'd never read before. So there we go. They were new to me. So I actually read these, and I was kind of interested in the parallels between these 2 stories. So I kind of want to talk about them at the same time. So one was Batman Special #1. This came out in 1984. Written by Mike W. Barr, artwork by Michael Golden and Mike DiCarlo, colors by Adrian Roy, and letters by Todd Klein. The other book I read was Batman Year 2 not to be confused with Batman Year One, the legendary, Frank Miller, David Mazzucchelli classic. Batman Year Two instead is again written by Michael W. Barr, art by Alan Davis and Todd McFarlane, Adrian Roy back on colors. There's different inkers and letters on those books. And that story actually unfolded in Detective Comics 575 through 578. So let me start with Batman Special Number 1. So both these stories kind of feature characters who are mirror images of Batman. So in Batman Special Number 1, which is basically just an oversized one-shot that came out in the 84, it's about a character called the Wrath, the Wrath. The Wrath is a vigilante stalking the streets of Gotham, killing police officers, and he's trying to assassinate Jim Gordon because the Wrath, as a young boy, his parents were criminals, and his parents were shot by a police officer, a young Jim Gordon, on the exact same night that Thomas and Martha Wayne were killed by Joe Chill in Crime Alley.
Oh my!
No.
So you literally have an exact parallel of Batman, but of course he kills. He's taking out police officers. Batman has to stop him and protect Jim Gordon.
Oh yes,
it's pretty goofy stuff. It's pretty ridiculous. What I like about it is the way Mike Golden and Mike DiCarlo in the artwork do a lot of mirror images of each other across the page. It has almost like, aside from the violence in it, it does feel like a Silver Age comic where you get like the evil version of Batman versus the good version of Batman. So it's a pretty fun.
Right, he's got a goatee, all that
Batman
stuff,
comic.
right?
It also happens to feature Leslie Tompkins, who is like low key one of my favorite Batman side characters. So
she's great. Like every time she shows up, I'm so delighted. I'm like, oh, you remembered.
Yeah, there's some really nice moments there with Leslie Tompkins, who, I mean, for those who don't know your Batman history, she's a woman that was a doctor. She ran a clinic in Crime Alley, Park Row, and she kind of comforted Bruce the night that his parents were killed. And there's a nice relationship between her and Batman where she doesn't approve of Batman's use of violence, and she knows that Bruce is Batman, but she recognizes that he's doing something good for the city as a whole. So there's an interesting tension between those two characters.
Right.
And there's a moment where, the Wrath, the character, he has a girlfriend, and they were going to, run off together, once he finishes his mission to kill Commissioner Gordon. And of course, the Wrath ends up dying by accident. Batman didn't kill him.
Spoilers.
And then, spoilers for a 38-year-old comic book.
Yeah.
But there's a moment where Leslie Tompkins, she comes back and she comforts the woman who was Wrath's girlfriend. It's like showing that her version of combating crime is compassion versus, Batman's use of violence. So it was a nice moment. I think overall, like I said, it was a solid 80s Batman story. On the other hand, Batman Year 2 for 1987 doesn't quite live up to its predecessor, Batman Year 1, the legendary comic by Frank Miller and Dave Mazzucchelli, which is probably my favorite Batman comic of all time. Yeah, believe it or not, Batman Year 2 doesn't quite match that level. It is one of the weirdest Batman comics I've ever read, though. So it has that going for it. Well, in Batman Year 2, we discover that 20 years before Bruce Wayne becomes Batman, there was another vigilante in Gotham called the Reaper. And the Reaper, wore a skull mask, and he had these giant razor sharp scythes like the Grim Reaper has. And he would just straight up kill criminals instead of, arresting them like Batman does, whatever. And he terrorized the underworld of Gotham for years. And all of a sudden he shows up again out of nowhere. And, Batman,
dun, dun, dun.
Exactly. Batman, who's kind of new to the job. It's only his second year. And then, James Gordon, who had just recently been selected to be commissioner. They have to work together to kind of defeat the Reaper, but Batman realizes that the Reaper is out of his league. He's not ready to combat him yet, and he has to debate, should I use the methods I already have developed as Batman, or do I have to fight fire with fire and use violence against the Reaper? The end of the first issue of Batman Year 2, it's revealed that Bruce Wayne decides that in order to defeat the Reaper is to use his own methods against him and kill him using the same gun that Joe Chill used to kill his parents, which apparently he had in the Batcave this whole time. So
what?
Wait a minute. So you're telling me that this could have been the plot of the Robert Pattinson Batman film instead of what we had.
Always room for the sequel. I'm just saying.
Oh no!
But anyways,
it could have been better in a way, I think, to be like in conversation with a darker version of yourself that's not like too real.
Well, I will just say it gets weirder after that because it turns out that, Bruce Wayne meets a young woman who's studying or like preparing to go into a convent to become a nun. Her father is a wealthy businessman who's come back to Gotham to kind of see her off to the convent. Bruce falls in love with her and they have a whirlwind romance. She decides not to go to the convent. She's going to marry Bruce Wayne. But, and again, spoilers for a comic that is 35 years old. The woman's father is actually the Reaper. So, and he discovers that Bruce Wayne is Batman. Yes.
So this particular segment of this plot that you've just described is, in fact, the exact backstory of Jack Sparrow's love interest in Pirates of the Caribbean 4 on Stranger Tides.
So you're telling me that the Jerry Bruckheimer Filmhouse production company has no original ideas? Shocker. Shocker.
But aside from that, it becomes even more complicated because Batman realizes the only way he can kind of defeat the Reaper is not by killing him. He decides he's going to actually work with the underworld criminal families of Gotham because, they have to get the Reaper off the streets because he's killing all of their thugs or their henchmen. Batman's got the same. We got to get this guy off the streets. He has to work with the crime families that have united, and they decide to team Batman up with none other than Joe Chill, the man who killed his parents. So he has to work with the man who killed his parents to take out this. So yes, it is a bit of a mess narratively. And look, so that's a 4-issue story. They did a sequel a couple years after this where Joe Chill's own son comes back and becomes a new version of the Reaper. I won't even get into that. That thing is an absolute mess.
I keep saying Paul with this like twinge of disappointment. It's not your fault, but like, well, this is. I feel like the writer entirely missed the point of Joe Chill. The point of Joe Chill is that violence can be totally random and arbitrary and the result of a lot of like societal factors out of one person's control, and to turn it into like Joe Chill was like fatally bound up in Bruce's whole entire life. It's like, no, like the whole point of like Batman just wants to make sure this doesn't happen to other people. It's not because of Joe Chill himself, it's because of crime in general. Joe Chill has to be the symbol for crime in general to like against other people that Batman's defending against. It can't be like a rivalry because then that's not the point.
Kara, hold on. We're talking about big, dumb, bombastic comics later in the show. We'll get to all of this later.
Exactly.
I already talked about a makeup manga, Mike. We're already there.
It's very funny because I'm reading this book. I'm like, this kind of fits in with the topic for today's episode. Oh, this is a very dumb comic. I will say, in its favor, Alan Davis is a tremendous artist. He does great Batman work. He already did a run on Detective Comics with Michael Barr before this story. That stuff looks great. The full circle story with Joe Chill's son, that's also illustrated by Alan Davis, and it looks lovely despite being a complete mess. It is interesting to see Todd McFarlane's work here because it's super early. It's before he goes to Marvel and works on the Hulk and Spider-Man. It's very early in his career, but already he's drawing Batman's cape at Spawn-like levels, which is kind of fascinating.
Hell yeah.
Nice.
And there's one issue where he actually inks himself, and it's the page layouts. I'm like, yeah, he does this in Spawn. He's already got it figured out. So it's kind of cool. Again, one of the most successful, popular artists of his time, to see him in his early phase there. And despite being such a complete shit show, Batman Year 2 was a huge influence on the Mask of the Phantasm story. So if you've seen the animated film Mask of the Phantasm, again, speaking of Kevin Conroy, they borrow all the good parts of Batman Year 2 for that story without any of the messiness. So that's a much better version of the story. I'll save you the trouble of reading it. Just go watch Mask of the Phantasm instead.
And Definitely. If you haven't seen Mask of the Phantasm, and if you are unfamiliar with the animated Batman world, which I don't think you would be if you're listening to this podcast, but on the off chance,
Right.
many people regard Mask of the Phantasm to be one of the best Batman stories ever in any medium. So maybe give that a whirl.
Kara, what's your other book that you read this week? Let's talk about it.
Deeply on brand again. I read Big Ethel Energy Volume 1 by Carol Brown Ahmed and Siobhan Keenan. This is an Archie comic. This is interestingly a webtoon first comic. So I read the trade, but it's kind of like Lore Olympus, where it started out as a webtoon and then they printed in a book to expand the readership. And it's terrific. So Ethel is a character in Archie comics where in like the mid-century Archie comics, like well into the 80s, I would say, she was still being referred to as Big Ethel and was a character always drawn as being like very tall, very gangly with like a buck tooth situation going on that was very unfortunate. And her defining character trait for the majority of her existence in Archie comics was to be totally in love with Jughead. And Jughead's one of his defining character traits at the time was he hates women. So their dynamic was always her chasing him and him like being very vocal about hating women. And so
what a time for comics.
What a time for comics indeed. And all right. So and in the last like 30 years or so, 40 years or so, they realized, oh, actually, that's a very offensive thing to do. We should probably not like reduce people to just being like the gangly, like ugly girl who's boy crazy. So this is I really like when Archie does things that are different. And if you're like a newer Archie watcher, you might be like, but they're always doing something different. And I'm like, well, yeah, because that's their advantage as a small family owned company. They can do whatever the CEO wants to do at any given time and just do it. Like they have an IP, but they're not like, oh, it's like the Batman IP and there's only so much we can do with it and he can never actually change. They're just like, yeah, give Ethel her own series. Make it be in her 20s. She's an adult now. This is for adult
Jughead
readers.
as hot as possible. I'm looking at some of the preview art.
Jughead's
Holy
so
smokes.
freaking hot in this book. Like,
dude.
Yo, everybody in this book.
Is this
webtoon,
allowed?
Yes,
I'm
they're
just
all
saying,
hot.
like...
I got to the end of volume 1 where the artist and author had their little bios, and the artist in her bio included a line where she was just like, one time my instructor told me to stop making everybody hot and I didn't listen. And I was like, good for you.
Dude, so, seriously, like I love this. I love the look of this comic. It's awesome. That's
the lesson they learned from the CW. They're like, oh, everybody wants to watch hot young people do stupid things. And I'm like, yes, add a supernatural element. We're good. So Big Ethel Energy. So Ethel is like, quote unquote, living her best life as a writer in Bushwick, Brooklyn. And on the and on the same day, she like gets a job offer that she can't refuse to come home to Riverdale to write a book about Riverdale, and gets evicted from her apartment. So she's like, well, guess I'm going home to Riverdale, the place I hated, the place where high school was terrible for me. So they're like interspersing her now with her high school flashbacks as she like reconnects with all the people from high school. I enjoy muchly that Archie is a total dick in this book because you get the sense from like reading any Archie comic ever. You're like, wait, Archie's kind of an asshole. He just strings all these girls along constantly. Like, why is he the lead? And so you kind of see that reflected in Ethel's point of view, where Archie's just like, hi, I'm Archie. And she's like, we went to high school together for 4 years and you scammed free movie tickets off me one time when I thought you were asking me out on a double date with Jughead. And I was like, oh, girl. So anyway, so it's all about like, you know, confronting your past, like trying to figure out new connections moving forward. A nice touch that I really liked is she runs into Moose Mason at the high school. And for anyone who's spent any time at all reading older Archie comics, you will know that Moose was often referred to as Big Moose. Right. And he was also always Midge's boyfriend, and his defining feature was being really jealous about any boy who wasn't him who talked to Midge, and saying the word duh like in all of his sentences because he was the lunkhead jock. So it was like a nice thing to have them be like Big Moose and Big Ethel both glowed up, and now they're like going on a date at Pops together. And I'm like, yes, this so cute. Love this for you. But yeah, in this webtoon / book, Jughead is like a super hot 20-something who apparently is like a millionaire from selling an app and now just like does cooking videos in his penthouse that he shares with Archie. And I'm like, love this for you.
Riverdale?
In Riverdale. I'm like, love this for you. Good job, babe. So I will definitely.
Dude, I'm so excited to read this. I'm so excited to read this on my phone tonight. That's what I'm going to do.
It's so delightful. I am definitely going to continue following this journey. And just like small sidebar, personal level of enjoyment. Shout out to this artist for this choice. If you were at all online in 2020, which I assume you were since you were in your house and not going anywhere, and you were like peripherally engaged in the cottagecore aesthetic part of the internet, you might have come across the Larika Matoshi strawberry dress and wanted one and or bought one during the pandemic. And Ethel is wearing the strawberry dress in one of the panels of this book, and I died. I was like, you are very online and everyone is very stylish, and I love this muchly. Keep doing weird shit, Archie. I'm here for it. So.
This dress is amazing. Okay, I need to stop Googling things. I'm very excited that you brought this to my attention, Kara. I thought this was just going to be some other Archie comic that is going to be hard for me to get into. This sounds
it's glorious.
Perfect.
Yeah, you will enjoy how pretty and awful everybody is.
Well, all right, let me talk about two quick comics before too quick. One of these is not going to be quick. I'm just going to warn you in advance. I'm going to talk about two more comics, then we're going to jump into the top of our pile picks. I read Gospel #1. This is from Image Comics, written and drawn by Will Morris. It's set during the reign of King Henry VIII, where religion is now for profit venture. Focus of the story is on a young woman named Matilda, daring, or Matilda, I don't know how you say that, I guess, a daring wannabe hero, and Pitt, a bard who's reluctant to skew the truth in order to tell a fantastical story. And this is a story about stories. It's really fun about talking about how tales grow from reality to myth, and the question of like, how can you tell fact from fiction in a time where word of mouth is the primary means of communication? I don't think that the story is as lofty as maybe I'm making it out to be, but I felt like that was kind of the core of the story. There is a really interesting twist at the end of this issue that I thought was fun, as this question of what is real and what is fake comes up. There's some past and present jumping around times, like within the story itself, and then into modern day, which I didn't really get the point of, but it didn't really take away from the story. So yeah, I don't know. I really like the way that Image is doing this thing where they're taking all of these different stories from different like single person artists or creative teams and trying to like publish them as miniseries. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that top of my pile, but this was really good. The art is really gorgeous. The characters are really fun. Like I said, the flashback stuff is a little clunky, but ultimately it's really good. I think this is going to be a super fun miniseries if you're looking for a 15th century period piece about storytelling. It's kind of cool. The other book that I want to talk about, and I'm sorry, in advance, I'm going to apologize. If you have no interest in Hellraiser, you can use the fancy chapter feature in your podcast catcher of choice to skip ahead. But I have a minute that I need to talk about, or I need to talk about this Hellraiser Omnibus that I finally finished. When I said that Hellraiser Omnibus Volume 1 was going to be at the top of my pile pick a few weeks back, I didn't realize that it was going to be 511 pages. I forget what an omnibus means. Ultimately, all I can say is, F this comic. This is awful. In the credits of this Boom Studios Omnibus, it says that Clive Barker helped write some of this, but I absolutely can't believe that. This feels like a really shitty superhero comic more than a Hellraiser comic. Despite the first 8 issues of this omnibus containing what I thought was pretty interesting meta-textual commentary and intricate like insight into the Cenobite world that is Hellraiser, it all gets absolutely erased in the second half of the book. Don't get me wrong, like I appreciated the dedication to the established lore with the puzzle boxes and other trinkets made by Le Marchand being core to the story until they fucking weren't, and suddenly Pinhead, aka Elliot Spencer, wants to destroy the world by becoming a kaiju in the Indian Ocean to fight Hell's god.
Why?
I know, if you have never seen any of the Hellraiser stuff, I'm sorry. there is so much to unpack here that makes me frustrated, because in Hellraiser 2 they established that there's this god that lives in hell, and it's a pretty fun idea, and then it goes completely untouched after that, except for in Hellraiser 4, where they talk about how these trinkets that this French toy builder created are like keys to unlocking portals to hell. It's really, really fun. The book takes a weird religious bent for like half a second, despite the core of a lot of the stories in all of the movies and everything, saying like, you think that the Christian God is the only God out there, you fools, there are greater things than that. And then suddenly Leviathan, who is this god of hell, says, oh, God's plans are a mystery. And I didn't know if that was sarcastic or earnest, because in the moment it never gets addressed. This Omni goes way off the rails. It elevates and erases established lore of the Hellraiser 4, aka Hellraiser Bloodlines, which pisses me off, because quite honestly, if you're going to lean into stupid horror lore, why not like extra lean into it when you have the possibility of like a comic book where there are no like production studios saying, no, we can't do that. The art of this book is all over the place, changing almost issue to issue. Near the end of this omnibus, it felt like artists tried 2 issues and then just were like, I can't do this because it's so bad. The final arc, written by Mark Allen Miller, aka the vice president of Seraphim Incorporated, which is Clive Barker's production company, really stinks. Awful comic book writer, clearly wanted to tell an action thriller, but then said, well, what if we made it Hellraiser?
Wow.
This is not Mark Miller, who has written things like The Ultimates. This is another Mark Miller.
Another bad Mark Miller.
Yeah, another bad Mark Miller. His story pulled really hard left for the series and made, honestly, the last half of this omnibus really tough to read. Bad lettering as well. Huge chunks of paragraphs and like squeezed into one bubble, which to me is like is super annoyance. Plus the art being all over the place just didn't make for a really good comic book.
I enjoy how normally on this show we're like, we're going to keep things positive and talk about books that we genuinely love. And this episode, every single one of us have been like, anyway, this was weird.
Here's the thing. I have fallen into the pit of Hellraiser, and I have a certain expectation. They set me up with 4 movies that were pretty bad and good at the same time. And then somehow 5 onward is like, nobody understands the movie or understands what Clive Barker was doing. Clive Barker's barely involved, if involved at all. So anyways, the comic book, I think I would have thought like with Clive Barker being involved in some capacity, maybe would have been good. There's even like scribbles and notes from Clive Barker in the omnibus itself. Like Boom Studios did a good job of making a well-collected omnibus. They always do a good job of this, but like the story just isn't there. And it's so frustrating because they kept trying to tie back into the lore of the story while missing the point of the series. Like the core of Hellraiser is the evil of man's lust for pain and pleasure is committed by the most heinous of us, and the innocents around us pay the price that these evil men seek for the greatest extremes of this lust, men and women, right? So Kirsty Cotton is a character from the first movie, the second movie, and then she gets referenced in the third movie, and she's not in the fourth movie, and then she shows up again in like the 6th movie or the 7th movie, I can't remember. And this whole storyline is about her for some reason, and yet you see none of the defining traits of her. In the very end of the story, we get references back to the first and the second movie, but then it's ultimately washed away because the story of Pinhead wanting to become like the god of the universe and bring hell to earth, it becomes like the thing, and that's not the point. The point of the series is to punish people for being awful human beings. Like every story about Hellraiser should be about a bad person doing bad things, and then at the end of the story, they get what's coming to them. It's a pretty simple formula, and yet all these writers out there think, oh, I need to twist it. I need to tell a story about a cop who's actually a good guy, but he can't control his emotions and blah, 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 and he dicks over his family, but he's actually a good person because he saved a sex worker once. It's like, that's Hellraiser 5, probably the worst movie I've ever seen next to Amsterdam. So anyways, this omnibus is so disappointing, and I'm sorry. I just had to go off on this. Like, I warned everybody, okay? Oh gosh, you guys. Anyways.
No, it's interesting because it's like your argument about what's wrong with this, the too much Hellraiser, is exactly what I just said about you didn't understand Joe Chill in the Batman context. Like, if you don't get the core conceit of your characters, what are you doing?
Right. Sam makes a good point in the chat. Hellraiser should also be very horny. I didn't get any horn out of this omnibus, okay? There was no horn in the omnibus. Besides, you know what the worst part about it is? So when you turn into a Cenobite, because right when you get killed by the Cenobites, who are the villains that come out of the dimension layer of hell,
Wait,
like
are
Pinhead
those
is
the
a
spike
Cenobite.
faces? Are those the spike
Yes.
faces, guys?
Here's the
I'm
thing.
not a horror person, Mike. I don't know what this thing is that you're going
That's
off
okay.
about. It's the guy with the white face, and there's like spikes sticking out of it. There's like
Yes.
spikes sticking.
Yes.
Okay. Oh, that's the guy who showed up for like 5 seconds in Cabin in the Woods. Spoilers.
Yes.
And
Well, sort of.
And I thought he looks sad. He needs a hug. And then
No, he doesn't.
maybe not.
Don't
but
hug
like,
him.
No, don't hug
Don't hug the
Pinhead.
Hell Priest. Don't do it.
So yeah, that's the thing. When you become a Cenobite, because when you get killed by these Cenobites, you become one ultimately.
Okay.
You turn into this manifestation of whatever your sin was, whatever your sins were, right?
Okay.
Kirsty Cotton somehow trades places with Pinhead and then also becomes a Pinhead, but it doesn't make any sense. I don't know. There's an implication that the head Hell Priest is a nail Pinhead person, but it's stupid. It's dumb. It doesn't make any sense. It ignores the lore that was established, and I can't get over it. I should have never gone on this journey.
I don't know. It's kind of interesting to hear about, Mike.
Yeah.
I enjoy how upset you are about this.
Yeah,
This is all just me wanting to watch Hellraiser 2022. Sorry, Paul. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I really appreciate, I've only watched the first 2 Hellraiser movies, and I appreciate you going the rest of the way so I don't have to. So thank you for your service. But also briefly want to say, if you didn't like this, you should definitely check out the Hellraiser Masterpieces collections that are also on Hoopla. At least the first one's on Hoopla. Because that was
they're on
comics that came out.
Comixology Unlimited too.
Yep, they came out in the early 90s, and instead of being an overarching story, they're basically just little one-shot standalone stories about different people finding the puzzle boxes.
Yes.
And it's got like a murderer's row of creators. Like Neil Gaiman does a story, Lana Wachowski does a story, Alex Ross is on art. One of the stories is Mike Mignola's story. Kevin O'Neill, the late great Kevin O'Neill, does a story in it. That stuff's really fun, so you'd probably like that a lot more.
Can I read that and not know and not have seen any of the films?
Kara, I don't know if you want to read any of this. It's pretty gruesome stuff.
I will say those comics are way more standalone. Like the Pinhead character doesn't even show up in only in like one story. Most of it is just.
But that's
little,
how
like,
it's supposed to be.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Cal, you sold me on this, Paul. I already checked these out on Comixology.
Okay.
I'm so mad. I spent all last night finishing this omnibus. I'm so mad. Anyways, we have to move on. I'm sorry. This is the longest episode in IRCB history. This is episode 350. We're going really hard today.
Yeah.
Let's talk about comics that are on the top of our pile. Comic books that either we are excited to read next, comics that are new, comics that are old, things that are on our bookshelf that we're like, you know what, I'm picking that up. Let's just jump right into things. Kara, what is on the top of your pull list?
Well, this will be real short for me, Mike, because I have nothing to say except I'm going to read this. It's it's the trade of Captain Carter, Woman Out of Time. And the only reason I knew about this existence is because I've been spending way too much time on Twitter, and I saw Jamie McKelvey tweeting, "In case you trade waited, it's here now." And I was like, thank you, Jamie. I didn't, but thank you. I will read that thing. You did the art. I will definitely read that thing. Or the writing. I don't even know. I just saw Jamie McKelvey and I was like, done. Sold. Anyone who was involved with Young Avengers, I trust you.
Mm-hmm.
The other creator is Marika Cresta. And, I don't know anything about this. I haven't really read any comic books that are like Captain America focused or Agent Carter focused or anything like that. Everything I know is from the movies. I'm a poser nerd on this one. But like Haley Atwell is so charming and wonderful as Peggy in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Like you could just stop making MCU content unless it's Captain Carter, because like her like multiverse whatever appearance in a recent film where like she's got the shield and she's got her little Union Jack jumpsuit and she's doing all the cool stunts and stuff. I'm like, yeah, I would like more of that, please. So I'm delighted that this comic exists so I can get more of that. Thank you. That's me.
Looks very pretty.
Yeah.
Looks very pretty.
Yeah.
Paul, what about you? What are you excited for? What are you reading next?
I'm excited for Below Ambition, which is the new book from Simon Hanselman. Of course, that is the follow-up to Crisis Zone, the Meg Mogg Owl and Werewolf Jones book that came out last year. It's probably my favorite book that came out last year. It directly addressed the pandemic. The characters Meg Mogg, Howell and Werewolf Jones are all stuck together in the house during the pandemic, and hijinks ensued. It's a if you haven't read these comics, there's a level of depravity that Hanselman has the characters rise up to, or lower down to, I guess, sink to, that is just so delightfully over the top and ridiculous. And this book is about Meg and Werewolf Jones getting their band back together, the band Horse Mania, and they're billed as the worst band in town. They're going to terrorize audiences with their distinct noise rock, I guess. And I'm excited just to see again these characters, because Hanselman is able to make characters that you don't want to relate to, but you find yourself relating to in a weird way, despite the obscene behavior that they engage in. And also, if you buy the hardcover of this book, it comes with a flexi disc single of Horse Mania's song "Stick It In for the Ambient." So I'll be sure to throw that in the record player as soon as I get my copy in my hands. So I know, Mike, you were excited for this book too. So
I was. I accidentally bought 2 copies. I forgot that I had. I tried to buy the digital edition, and it turns out I bought the physical edition. Again, this is probably one of those accidental, like 3 a.m. I was drinking too much the night before. I was like, I didn't order that book. And then I forgot that I also pre-ordered it for my shop. So I picked it up on Saturday. So now I have 2 copies.
Perfect.
So, I've got the sealed version that has the flexi disc untouched. And then I have the unsealed version that has the flexi disc that fell out on my floor and is definitely covered in cat hair because I forgot that there was a disc inside of it. But I'm also very excited to read this.
Yeah.
Well, I guess let me talk about my pick. I guess before I do that, I should talk about our Discord picks. We got folks hanging out with us live on the Discord today. Wonderful human beings who get to hear all the technical difficulties and don't get to skip over my Hellraiser rants. They're reading some books this week. Hannah's reading Gods and Mortals. Danny is reading Batman One Bad Day, Mr. Freeze #1. Jeff is reading a whole smattering of comics, but wanted to shout out Queen and Country Volume 3. And Aaron is reading Witch Head Atelier to finish up or get close to finishing the Goodreads reading challenge that we have going on right now. If you're not a member of that, there's still time to read all, I think it's like 20 some books or 18 books or something like that we have on the list. It's a huge list of amazing comics. Every year we curate probably some of the best comic lists in the world. So make sure you're part of the Goodreads group. And once we hit 1,000 folks in that group, we're going to be doing some merch giveaways. Anything that we have on our merch store, you can get for free. As long as you're a Goodreads member, you get entered into the random giveaway that we're doing. But
I'm going to interrupt you real quick because I learned today that, and I don't know where this statistic came from. It was in like a New York Times editorial, but apparently the average American adult reads 13 books a year. So I just want to thank all the comic book readers out there for bringing up that average nationally, because it's definitely us.
Hell yes. Yep. Definitely our group that's bringing that national average up. The book, though, that I'm excited for this week is Kroma #1. This is by Lorenzo Di Felici. The cover for this book looks super sick, and Di Felici's work on Oblivion Song was super solid. Image has been doing this thing, like I said earlier, where they take a single person creator and they just throw them or let them do a mini series, and I love that. They did that with Gospel, like I mentioned earlier, Carmen by Gillian March, Voyages by Sumie Keskin. Sorry about that. That's just also out this week. I kind of love it. I love this idea of getting these original graphic novels or mini series kind of broken up into chapters and delivered to us every month. I go back and forth on this. Should this be a graphic novel? Should it be single issues? I was listening to an episode of Contest of Challengers, and they were talking about they were talking to Ryan Brown and how he said that he would love to just do original graphic novels so he could deliver his books whenever he wanted. But the problem with that is that you lose hype. If you're not serialized, people only talk about your book once, versus if you're serialized, they talk about your book as many times as it comes out, which I was like, I never thought about it that way. I've been trying to damn the entire comic system by asking for more graphic novels. But yeah, I thought that was a really interesting insight. I love these little miniseries though, because they feel super like auteur, like these single person creative teams just pumping out a really cool series, and it's really beautiful art, clearly done far in advance. But I'm okay with that because it ends up with a consistent schedule, and if you're reading it month to month, that's great, and you end up with a super solid collected edition when it's done. The synopsis for this sounded interesting, like imprisoned in a tower within the walls of Pale City, Kroma is believed to be the most evil creature alive, which you've already sold me, done. But a chance meeting with the mysterious orphan Zet creates an opportunity for Kroma to escape her cruel fate. That is, if they can survive the strange dangers within the city walls and the monstrous threats that lie behind. I mean, I'm all for that. Sounds really cool. Whatever. Looks beautiful. I'm on board to at least try one issue. So that's top of my pile for me. Before we even allow for any commentary, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to be talking about big, bombastic, stupid comics that are dumb but fun. We've got a whole range of comics, a lot of suggestions from people on the Discord, so get ready for that. We'll be back in just a second. This week on I Read Comic Books, we're talking about big, bombastic, stupid comics that are dumb but fun. Sometimes I write topic titles into our Google spreadsheet, and I go, I don't know what's going to come out of this, but it's definitely going to be something fun. Little did I know, we were already going to hit the theme before we got to the second half of this show. So I think you may have an idea of what we're talking about here, but Kara, Paul, and I think we approach this topic with some different ideas in mind. So let's go around the room really quick and talk about how we were thinking about this topic and maybe list a couple comics, and then we'll jump into things. So I guess, Paul, to start with you, when you looked at this topic, what first came to mind for you? How did you make your rubric for what to list in our show notes?
I was going for the big action books, books that you can kind of turn your brain off a little bit and just kind of go for the ride. I immediately think about Jack Kirby comics, classic Kirby comics, where it's just like, not that those books are, dumb, but they're dumb in a way that it's just like, you don't need to think too hard. You can just go for the ride. There's great concepts, great ideas, and just big action. Like, if you can get a comic where it's Superman and big gray monster punching each other to death, like the death of Superman, it's not a good comic, but it kind of hits all the buttons you want sometimes on a comic book. You know what I mean? Right. So that's what I was thinking. Death of Superman is one that came to mind. OMAC by Jack Kirby, anything by Tom Scioli. I can go into more detail about those books, but those are the books that came right to my brain when you pitched this topic.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. I guess, Kara, what was coming to your mind when we started to shop this idea around?
I think of this in terms of like when I'm reading a comic book and my brain just says comics, everyone.
Yes.
Because something that's really I really love comics when they're just like, yes, we're a comic book. We're not trying to be fancy. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel. We are a comic book, and we know why you're here. So
sure.
I think that's why, to go fractionally off topic, Aquaman is my favorite DC universe movie, because Aquaman the movie is like a dumb fun comic. Like, I watched Aquaman and I was like, comics, everyone.
Right.
So it's like that kind of thing where it's like over the top and it like slightly doesn't make sense, but in like a dumb, like high sci-fi or like fantasy way, or just like everything in it is ludicrous and is just silly. So I had like a range of things. So like some in the like, this is a comic book genre, I had things like Axe Cop. Like, I remember the whole time I read Axe Cop, I was just like, comics. There's one time I came across a copy of the like X-Men and Teen Titans crossover from the 80s,
right.
when both of those were kind of like, this is the apex of comic books, and they had a crossover issue where it's like, for reasons, these heroes in different management companies are going to be in the same book, and Beast Boy and Kitty Pryde are going to hit it off, and you're like, yes. So
right.
So, or in that genre, like a lot of crossovers fall into this category, like Batman meets Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, which actually is genuinely a good comic book.
Yeah.
But it's also dumb. Like, they're Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. They're like so hilarious that they're in a book together, because the TMNT were designed as like a counterpoint satire to The Dark Knight Returns and shit like that. And then it's like, no, now they meet Batman. The recent Transformers My Little Pony crossover that IDW did, delightful. Peak comic books, love every second. And then there's stuff that has like just like an overall, like everything about it, I'm just like, yes, this is dumb but fun. Like, I hate Fairyland. I would like, I put a question mark on this one, but like I would maybe put Bee and Puppy Cat in this category, because everything, you're just like, this is dumb and delightful and I love it.
Sure.
Yeah, like Tag and Bank for the Star Wars comics that Dark Horse used to do in like their Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead genre of like, what would it be like to comically go through the Star Wars universe through the eyes of these two morons? Like, let's find out. So,
well, yeah. So like, it sounds to me, it's funny because I think both of you kind of hit. I hit kind of the same thoughts when I was coming at this, right? Like in my mind, the first thing I thought of was Siege by Brian Michael Bendis and Forever Evil, right? Because I was thinking like, what are the biggest, most absurd comics that I can think of that I've read? And then I started asking around to different people because I was thinking humongous. Like, I don't have to think about this. Crossover events, say what you will. If you jump into them and you just go into them with this idea that I think we try to pitch on the show very often is like, just roll with everything. Ultimately, it will probably make sense, right? I was thinking of this. Some folks pointed out AVX on the Discord, Ultimates by Mark Millar and Jonathan Brian Hitch, Spider-Man, Marvel Zombies, Ultimatum, King in Black, Absolute Carnage, these humongous event things where you're just like, comic books can get no bigger than this in a lot of ways in the superhero sense, right? I think a lot of probably what we'll talk about today is superhero stuff because that's kind of where my mind was going. But there are other properties, and I think, Kara, you made some great points there about like things that are kind of dumb but fun and are peak comics. But in my mind, I was trying to think, what is the most absurd, humongous thing that could be published on page? And these types of events and these humongous books end up getting a lot of publication just because CBR or Bleeding Cool or someone will pick up an article that's like, you wouldn't believe it, but all of these characters are now going to fight against each other. This person's now a bad guy. Can you believe it? These types of things that get a lot of people talking from a purely like turn off your brain, really immature view of comics, which is totally fine. Like, there's nothing wrong with these things. I think the word dumb has a negative connotation, but also I think the thing that made this topic interesting to me was that these comic books exist because they are super fun to read. That's the other part of it. They are dumb but fun, and they're worth your money. They're worth spending time on. So I want to kind of go through this
Mike,
and discuss what that feeling is.
No, because everything that you just described about like hyping people up and saying you won't believe what happens next, everything up until the point where you were like, and also they're fun and they're worth your money, my brain was going Blackest Night, the entire Rainbow Lantern Corps, like everything.
Right, but
I had a friend who bought every book, Mike, in the Blackest Night tie-ins. They were just like, it was basically like, oh, you know what worked for Marvel? Zombies. How can DC do zombies? There's going to be a Black Lantern ring, and it makes zombies of all the people who are dead that we won't shut up about because we can't just like let it go. So let's bring back everybody as a zombie. And then there's all these other, like, it's not just the Green Lantern Corps. It's all these, there's just the emotional spectrum of color. And I was like, all right, which Age of Aquarius, woo-woo, tarot reading, crystal charging person said, you know what will really, really sell comic books? Auras. We're just going to go deep into auras.
Jeff Johns.
Listen, I already mentioned another Jeff Johns comic, there's nothing that says these books are actually good. I guess I should add a little asterisk on here, right? Because not all of these big, dumb comics are actually good, right? I think a thing like Brightest Day, pretty dumb and probably not worth your money on the whole, right? But I also think that Forever Evil, probably one of the coolest crossover events and most fun I've had reading comics that were like out of my purview in a long time, right? Like, I love Judgment Day. I don't even know if I can recommend it. It's such a good comic, but also Marvel fumbled the bag in terms of making sure that you got everything you needed to know about it, because they should have just made it a 25-issue event instead of like a 2 6-issue events plus like 40 tie-ins, and they're all written by Kieran Gillen, and it's a whole mess. But what I'm saying, I guess what I'm getting at here is that there is a very, very, very fine line to the difference between big and dumb and fun and big and dumb and bad, right?
Yeah.
I think we know what that is, but it's really hard to define.
To quote the classic film Spinal Tap, there's a fine line between clever and stupid, and these books kind of walk that razor thin line,
Hey,
like, Was Siege a good comic overall? No. Was the reason Siege made probably one of the most fun things that happened in Marvel Comics in like 25 years? Absolutely.
What was it?
Norman Osborn becoming the big leader of the free world from the superhero perspective is the coolest thing ever. And I don't care what anyone says. It's such a fun concept to say the bad guys are in charge and Norman Osborn of all people is the person running it. Like, I posted a screenshot in our notes that has Namor, Emma Frost, Doctor Doom, Norman Osborn, and Loki, and then like a mysterious hood figure because there's this stupid character that Brian Michael Bendis created that I hated. But anyways, that cabal is literally what they were called. Is so fun, right? The League of Supervillains, without calling them that, came together to say, like, how can we squash the mutants and how can we kick the Asgardians out of Oklahoma, because that was a thing for a moment in Marvel Comics. Such a fun thing, and the heroes are struggling. Like, it was truly a fun time. The Siege event is stupid, but the reason Siege happened is so fun to me.
I thought Emma Frost was a good girl.
This is before she was a complete good guy. This is before that.
Okay. I have to assume that anything with Doctor Doom involved would be dumb but fun. If you like adhere to the spirit of Doom, which is the one that I see on the internet, which is just totally pompous and overblown. And I think the version of him that was in the Squirrel Girl comic books is like my version of Doom.
Sure. You know, I think, it's a very fine line we have to tease out, because there's a lot of comics that I lovingly describe as being dumb, even though I think they're clever, but there's a self-awareness kind of to them that I think, you know, they know exactly, like you said, Kerry, they know exactly what they're giving you and it's exactly what you want. So if you can kind of only do in a comic book, I mean, obviously Jack Kirby is, for me, like the pinnacle of this stuff. I think there's so much of his 70s DC stuff that walks this fine line. It's so ridiculous and over the top that it's easy to get caught up in, but when you step back and try to explain it, you sound like you're insane. You know, when I'm like, there's this Jack Kirby comic where they have a miniature version of the planet Earth that they're projecting horror movies onto and a bunch of monsters live on it. Like, that is amazing, right? When you're reading it, but when you try to explain to somebody how smart it is, again, you sound like you're insane. So for me, like, that's the kind of stuff I like. And I think OMAC by Jack Kirby is probably the pinnacle for me, because I think the first issue of OMAC that he did is probably the best single issue of comics I've ever read. And just all it is like a big dude wrecking other armies of other people. And then he blows up a factory where they're building exploding blow up dolls. So it's so insane over the top. And that's what makes it great.
That's so funny that you mentioned OMAC, because OMAC is like one of my first like forays into event comic books, was having to figure out all the crap that was happening around Infinite Crisis at DC.
Yeah.
And and I was like, I was a very dedicated teenager. I was like, I'm going to read every tie-in so I know what the fuck is going on. And so one of those books was like about OMAC, but I didn't know anything about the OMAC backstory. This is like slightly pre-Wikipedia. Like, you still had to figure out like your fan sites and stuff to look up comic book character backstories. And there was like one paragraph about OMAC in my DC Comics encyclopedia that my mom bought me for Christmas that year, because she was like, you seem confused. And I was like, yes. So like, to me, OMAC is part of that in terms of, that piece of technology that Batman created, and it turned against him, because who could ever have predicted sentient AI surveillance technology being used for evil? And of course, now it's 2022 and we're in the world that we live in, but like, you know, so not as like dumb but fun. But I remember like reading all those tie-in books and being like, what the hell is happening and why does it all matter? Because the stuff like leading up to Infinite Crisis was like, there was like the OMAC book, there's like the Day of Vengeance book that I loved with all the magic users in the DC universe. There was here's your dumb but fun comic, the Rand Thanagar War, which was just like a 6-issue miniseries where they're just like, all right, the Adam Strange people on the planet Ran, which is like your space age, like future, talk about like utopian future positive like 60s vision. That's that. And the Thanagarians, which are like Hawkman and Hawkwoman and Hawkgirl, and like they've got wings, and then they're just fighting each other in space for reasons, and you're like, okay.
Sure.
Yeah. But this sounds exactly like what we're talking about here today, right?
Yeah.
Like there's no reason. It's just comic books for the sake of comic books, right? There's no major like theme or thought beneath it. It's just like, what if we did cool thing and other cool thing together, you know?
But the thing, you run into the problem where, and I don't want to, again, make Danny upset by talking badly about superhero comics, but you run into the problem where you have these big franchises, and I read every DC crossover. Every time they put out a new one every year, I read them, and I'm like, I enjoy them for what they are. But you reach a point where it's like, you can't do too much to change these characters. There's always a bit of cynicism when it comes to the big superhero corporate IP crossovers, you know?
Mm-hmm,
and I think the pinnacle for that is probably still for me the Death of Superman from 1993, because I was of prime comic book reading age. I was all in. I was, I read those comics, and I pulled out my trade paperback of the Death of Superman that I've had since 1993, and I'm flipping through it, and it's not a good comic. I liked it when I was 12. I don't so much like it now that I'm 40, but it is that perfect example of a big dumb idea, and they're really trying to convince you how smart it is or how important it is. I will say the one cool thing about the Death of Superman is because it ran through 7 different issues series, the 4 Superman books. It tied them all together. As they're building up to the big climax in Superman number 75, where Superman and Doomsday literally punch each other to death in the streets of Metropolis, the issues get bigger and bigger. So like there's one issue where every page has 4 panels of different sizes, but every page has 4 panels. The next issue, there's only 3 panels per page. And then you get the penultimate issue. Each page has 2 panels. And then Superman 75, all splash pages. And it's such a neat, concept, but it works so well when you notice it. So.
Danny in the chat just pointed out, like, this is hilarious, as this week DC celebrated the death of Superman by reprinting it and releasing an anthology companion, which is totally true. We're also celebrating an anniversary because this is episode 350 of I Read Comic Books. Thanks, Perfect. DC, for celebrating with us.
So when I think of Death of Superman in terms of dumb but fun comics, I think of all the stuff that happened kind of after that, because Superman wasn't it like Superman didn't get resurrected right away, so there were these other like lesser Supermen flying around for a while. There was like
robots, right?
The red one and the blue one and the boy one.
That was later. That was later.
Wait,
you had,
that was different?
Superman,
I thought that was all
Superman
part of the same line.
Superman Red and Blue came later. That's when Superman had the electric powers, the Electro Superman. The Death of Superman. He came back as 4 people. You had oh my God, the Exterminator. You had Superboy, who was the clone of Superman and Lex Luthor. Then you had Cyborg Superman, and then God, who was the 4th? Now why I'm blanking on the 4th.
Like when I think of Superman in the 90s, I think mullet, I think color coding, I think Connor Kent in his leather jacket and thigh strap, whatever that was. I think steel.
Oh, that's the 4th. Yeah, steel was the 4th. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, just like all this stuff where I'm just like, what was happening over there? It's just like.
Well,
but this is what we're talking about. It's fun and dumb, right? Were they trying to go for something main, or they were just trying to say we could sell 4 times as many Superman comics if we make 4 Supermen? Because
around the same time they were doing, I'm just lumping the 90s into one decade in a blender, but that same decade DC was doing Nightfall, which was also dumb, from what I understand, because they were just like, all right, Batman, but French and blue, and did I get that right?
Yes, because Bruce Wayne had his back broken by Bane, so his replacement was Jean-Paul Valley, the Azrael, took on the mantle of Batman. So yeah,
man, something was.
we did
over
this in
DC.
Better Batmobile. Okay, everybody, we did this already. All right, go listen to that on Patreon.
Okay, but fun, Mike. You wanted dumb but fun.
This is true. I just want a reason to talk about like Marvel Zombies. Did anyone read Marvel Zombies at the time? when it came out?
I saw the covers in the comic book shop, but I was like, I'm not a Marvel girl. I'm DC. So I did not read them. But tell me about
it's okay.
them.
It's okay because they're bad, but they are basically Marvel trying to find an excuse to write zombies into their universe and tell a different story, using basically like Robert Kirkman to say, hey, remember, that series you're doing this really? What if you did that for our characters? And so, zombies come and go. I genuinely can't remember. I remember being obsessed with the idea of collecting all of the Marvel zombie stuff because when I saw the hardcover Marvel zombies, I was like, I gotta have that because it had these incredibly gory and disgusting covers that I was so surprised Marvel could publish, and I thought they were so cool as like this 19-year-old kid. I was like, oh man, let's do this. And they're ultimately kind of just bad. It's not great, but it's just like kind of force fed, like, oh no, this person became a zombie, oh no, this person became a zombie. What would happen if Spider-Man was a zombie? Would he still do the right thing? It's dumb. It's very dumb on the premise, but like if you like zombie comics, it totally works because they're not bad stories. They're just Walking Dead but superheroes in some ways. And I'm sure that there are probably other comics out there that do superheroes but zombies better. I heard that Deceased is pretty good. Tom Taylor is a pretty good writer. So like, is that big and dumb? I don't know, because I heard that that's actually just good. It's not even big and dumb. It's actually just good comics. So then that's the other like line that you need to cross is like, is this actually a good comic that has a big dumb concept, but it turns out it's actually good comics? Or is it just big and dumb and you don't have to think about it too much? Like, I don't know. I'm sure that there are listeners out there. In fact, I know there are listeners out there that would say all of Tom Taylor's comics are big and dumb and you don't have to think about them. Because you know what? I could understand that point of view. But I don't know. I wouldn't put that on the list because in my mind, there's no bombastic, insane, ridiculous, over the top, this doesn't make sense, but it's really fun stuff to his comics. I think he tries to logic and explain things away in a way that is interesting while you're reading them. But that might just be me.
But you don't want that when you're reading a dumb fun comic. You want
exactly.
You want Barry Allen the Flash is running so fast that he's become one with the Speed Force and is disintegrating panel by panel before your eyes.
Exactly.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, Mike, it's kind of an interesting point there that you brought up with where it's that fine line, because I was thinking about comics that are ridiculously fun and over the top, and I kept thinking about Murder Falcon and Do a Powerbomb, the Daniel Warren Johnson books, because they're so much fun, but there's a real like emotional core to those stories. It's hard for me to call them dumb fun because there's a heartbreaking tragedy at the core of it, even though Do a Powerbomb is about pro wrestling, which is the dumbest fun thing imaginable. But there's like a really like potent, heartbreaking story that, is part of that comic. So I have a hard time calling it dumb, even though it might be one of my favorite, most fun comics to read right now.
Right.
No, right. That's why I don't put the Gem and the Holograms comics into this category, because although aesthetically everything about that is just candy, when you actually read it, you're like, character development? I'm feeling things, and like that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about Marvel zombies.
And it's funny. There were books that I was also thinking about, right? Like Chainsaw Man. Jeff on the Discord mentioned Chainsaw Man, and I was like, I feel like there is commentary in that book that you can kind of see that exists about violence and fear that the creator is trying to get to. But also, this is the same creator that brought us Fire Punch, probably one of the dumbest, worst mangas I've read in a long time. So, not to say that people can't evolve and change and get better as creators. They absolutely can. Chainsaw Man is full of extremely dumb things. This comic is about a guy who just wants to hold a girl's hand and then eventually wants to touch a girl's boob, and then he starts eating puked up food out of someone's mouth. Like, it's an insane comic. It's stupid. Yeah. We don't have to get into it. It is a dumb comic. It's very fun, but I think that the end kind of eliminates it from this list because I feel like there's commentary. Maybe that's just me with wishful thinking.
No, that's how I feel about One Punch Man. One Punch Man is perhaps one of the purest distillations of like, this is a comic book, but in a way that's like so good. Like, I read this book like one time 10 years ago and I'm still thinking about it because like, so it's not this, even though it feels like this. And that's that like fine line you were trying to describe earlier. Yeah.
One Punch Man making fun of the entire like shonen like storytelling power scoping or power creep thing is very, very fun. Even to this day, 24 volumes later 180 some chapters later, it's still making fun of the stupid power creep that you see in like a lot of old and even some current like shonen manga that comes out from Weekly Shonen Jump, and
You leave
everybody's
Vegeta
eating
out
it
of
up.
this.
It's great.
If I may, because I know we're running long today, if I may like pick one perfect example of this type of comic to pitch as my
Please.
shining example, I was originally going to say Transformers versus G.I. Joe by Tom Scioli, because we talked about that on the show a lot when it came out. For me, that is basically like seeing a kid with the toys in the sandbox, smashing them together on the page. But I'm going to say another Tom Scioli book, American Barbarian, might be my favorite example of a dumb fun comic, because there's no toy tie-ins. It's purely Scioli doing basically pure Kirby stream of consciousness comics on the page. It's whatever story is there is very loose. It's about a guy whose 7 brothers and father are killed, and he swears revenge. He also happens to have red, white, and blue striped hair, and he's a barbarian. That's why he's the American Barbarian.
Okay.
There's a point in the story where he has to fight the evil Tutankhamun. Instead of Tutankhamun, it's Tutankhamun. It's a giant pharaoh guy whose feet are giant tanks, hence the name. It is just pure ridiculousness on the page. It's stream of consciousness. Is one of my very favorite comics of all time. American Barbarian is my perfect pick for a dumb, fun, over-the-top comic book.
I like that. Maybe we could wrap up here, Kara. Why don't you pick one more book that you think really you could deliver this to someone and say, this is my perfect definition here.
Oh, God. Okay, well, I was going to talk about Garfield, but now I feel like maybe I should talk about Archie vs. Sharknado instead.
Absolutely. Yes, please.
Okay, so again, Archie Comics, something that they can do and do very often at this point is do these like totally insane crossovers, and like the bulk of their books have never been like in continuity, so they can do that. And around the time of the 3rd Sharknado movie, they printed Archie versus Sharknado, and it is everything that you're picturing and more. Like, talk about a one and done dumb comic. Like, you're at the beach in Riverdale, everything's fine, dating, shenanigans, ice cream, burgers, and then all of a sudden a Sharknado hits town. Like, I don't know what else you want.
Man.
That is perfect comic books right there, right? You just like read this book and have fun, right?
Yeah. Oh my God, I bought a stack of them. I got invited to a Sharknado 3 viewing party in Manhattan when that was coming out, and on my way in, I stopped at Midtown Comics and bought a stack of Archie versus Sharknado to give out as party favors.
Amazing. That's amazing. Well, I guess my one pick, I was trying to think like AVX is probably the best one. Avengers versus X-Men, the most ridiculous reason to have the Avengers and the X-Men fight each other. It doesn't even have good tie-ins, doesn't have any really good story arc. It's pretty bad, honestly, as a comic. So I don't think that it's a lot of fun. Like, the idea is fun. On paper, the Avengers have to fight the X-Men. Like, that's so fun. Except for it doesn't execute very well. So I think the book that I'm going to pick is God Hates Astronauts by Ryan Brown. Because I think, like, Ryan Brown, if you've ever read any of his comics, he just likes to have a good time. He likes to tell really funny stories. And God Hates Astronauts is it feels like a stream of consciousness, very similar to what Paul was describing with American Barbarian. Like, why not have a guy who has a crab for a head? Or why not make this ghost superhero with a horse head superpower guy now suddenly the main character that has to fight, bear people that live in an aqua space station or something like it. It's over the top, it's insane, and you will laugh every page. It's very dumb. You don't have to think about it. And it's so much fun from start to finish. Yeah, if you want just like a good time in comics, I think God Hates Astronauts is the perfect example here. Very similar to everything we've described. You could hand this to someone and they would just laugh. You don't need to know anything other than what's given to you on the page, and it's so great for that reason. Yeah. So, we did it, everybody. We talked about big, dumb, fun, bombastic comics. I'm so glad that we had this conversation. I'm glad that I had a reason to remember all of the plot points of Siege, because quite honestly, the end of Civil War is my favorite thing that happened in Marvel Comics, I think, ever. And I love that. So thank you so much for allowing us to have this conversation. Next week, Brian, Nick, and I are going to be talking about our Goodreads challenge for 2022, the books that we picked and why we picked them. So if you're not part of our reading challenge, make sure you go do that. You have like a month before we wrap that up, so you can read all the books that are on that list. I want to say thank you to Paul and Kara for being on this episode with me. This is a lot of fun, guys. You can always check us out on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Discord, Goodreads. We got all that stuff in the show notes. Make sure you check us out there. Patreon is where you can get access to IRCB Movie Club, the new Saga of Saga episode, so much more. The new IRCB Movie Club is coming out at the end of this month. We're talking about Blade. It was a lot of fun for me and Paul and Brian. Mm-hmm. Infinity Shred is the best band in the universe. They do all of our music. Xander can be your angle or your demon. You decide. Next time, I want to say thank you. I lost myself on that. I'm sorry. I want to say thank you to Danny for proof listening. Thank you to everyone listening live and sticking with us through all the technical difficulties and the ups and downs. And if you've listened this far in the episode, you are a fantastic human being. So thank you so much. Until next time, though, comics are good, and so are you.